Cliona is the Environmental Justice Policy Officer in Trócaire, I should say.
Thanks, Oisín. First of all, just to say, I said to myself last Friday, and I'll say it again, mental note to self, never to be put in a position where you have to speak after Dr. Navarro. It's not a good place to be, and I would add Silas to that list. But yeah, just to say thanks to Oisín and to the two speakers for this joint event this evening. It's a great opportunity to have supporters and activists and interested people from different sectors and different organisations come together to discuss an issue that means something to all of us. Just to reflect a little bit on Trócaire and how Trócaire is involved in the issue, and then maybe to say where we are in terms of our work here in Ireland. As Oisín mentioned, Trócaire and other big development agencies started getting more explicitly involved in climate change, I suppose publicly or visibly just a number of years ago. And that came about indeed because in our own strategic planning and really talking with our partners overseas about what was impacting on them at the moment and what was going to be important for them in the years to come. Climate change, or the impacts that we know to be the impacts of climate change, changing weather patterns, unpredictable seasons, more extreme and more frequent natural disasters, they were coming up from all the programmes, be it Central America, be it the Horn and East of Africa. We could see that our programme work, our long-term development work, was giving way to more and more disaster response. So it was a fundamental question for Trócaire. If our mission is about helping people to develop long-term, then we have to address climate change. So there was a process to integrate climate change both within our programming and within our policy work, our policy and advocacy work at the national and the international levels. So within our programs in Africa and Latin America and Asia, we looked at our sustainable livelihoods programs, the work that we were supporting in terms of agriculture, land rights, things like that, and how we could better take into account current climate impacts and future climate impacts into that work. But at the same time, whilst figuring out for ourselves how to best support people to cope with the impact and to adapt in the long term, we realised that fundamental parts of supporting that work would be, first of all, to ensure that work would receive sustainable support from ourselves, from governments, from the people who have a responsibility for causing climate change. But also, Trócaire has a fundamental responsibility to also address the causes of climate change themselves, both here in Ireland and internationally. So mitigation has always been at the core of Trócaire's policy and advocacy work on climate change as well. So we faced a challenge in the beginning, coming out and saying to people here in Ireland that Trócaire was suddenly campaigning on climate change. So, and working on a national climate law. What was that all about? It seemed very national. It seemed very environmental, very technical. Why was this something Trócaire was involved in? But again, this for us it really comes down to a justice and an integrity issue. If we're going to be working with our partners overseas on the ground, we also have to be addressing the causes of the problem here at home. Something that brought that home to me very strongly was a discussion with our regional manager from Central America, who Ricardo would know, Sally O'Neill. She was speaking about a regional partner meeting they had a few years ago, and they had invited partners from the various countries to come together and share the work that they were doing in their own programs on climate change and including advocacy. And it was actually partners from El Salvador who were there, and they gave a presentation about the work that they were doing and the advocacy work they were doing in El Salvador. They then proceeded to move on to another set of slides that basically gave a rundown of Ireland, of Ireland's rate of emissions, of what was going on here in terms of the response, etc. And as most of you probably know, it's not something to write home about. And so they turned to us and said, well, what are you doing? So we're taking action here, what are you doing there? And Trócaire has been working, of course, on climate policy across those years, but for me that really drove home that sense of responsibility to take action here at home. I suppose just to reflect a bit on what the two speakers said, I think something you both came out with strongly was that sense of shared responsibility and the importance of dialogue, of discussion, of coming together to talk about these issues. So as Ricardo said, there's a responsibility among those who have put the carbon in the atmosphere to ensure that they do not put any more in the atmosphere, and that they provide the space for those and the support for those who need to develop sustainably. That's one thing. But we all have a responsibility to act, and that's where I would point to the Trugra campaign on climate change, which is called Up to Us. And what you'll see is really this sense of the global, and what we want to try and get across in that campaign is that sense that it's our common future. It's yours, it's mine, it's our common future, and whether it impacts on us now or future down the line, it's going to impact on all of us together. And another thing you said very strongly was that if we are serious about this issue, then we will act on it. And the disconnect at the moment between the rhetoric, so we've seen the science, we've seen what it's telling us, and the rhetoric about how this is the most pressing problem facing humanity, and the response must be urgent, etc. The disconnect between that and actually the level of commitment and action on the ground is quite stark. So that sense of it's up to us. We see the inadequacy and the slow pace of the response at the global level, at the national level, the level of the decision makers. It's up to us to say, yes, actually we're ready to address this. We're ready to say, okay, we see what needs to be done. We know it's going to be difficult, but let's start with what we know needs to be done, and let's have the discussion about how we do it. So, be it at the global agreement, climate change within the UN, be it a national climate law here in Ireland, let's agree on what we need to do based on the science, and then let's debate as a society how we go about doing it, and fundamentally putting the most vulnerable people at the centre of concern. At the global level, it's the countries who are most vulnerable, both because of the geography, because of the socio-economic deprivation, that deficit in the ability to cope. And here within Ireland as well, we're going to be impacted by the responses to climate change differently. We have to ensure that the most vulnerable people here in Ireland and the most vulnerable people globally are not impacted in the response, and that they are supported to cope and to adapt with the changes we're going to see. I'm going to leave it there unless you want me to say something else about the...
I can say a few words.
Yeah.